Thank you, Fred, and thank you very much for this invitation to take part in this debate. And you will remember that 2008 and 2009 were dominated by a financial crisis. And for the European Commission, for Europe indeed, state aid control was practically the only policy instrument which could be used in some way to put some framework on state intervention in the banking sector. So I'm going to concentrate, Fred, on simply the lessons from that period for any authority, whether you have powers in relation to state aid control, or indeed have simply the powers of recommendation as far as state aid intervention is concerned. And I'm going to start off with something very simple. First lesson is speed. Whatever legal instruments you have at your disposal, they must be able to react swiftly to the demands of a crisis, with direct lines of communication between any investigation going on and the person or the body empowered to take a decision. A crisis demands swift reactions. Procedures which delay action add to the problem rather than helping to solve it. It's a very simple lesson, but it's very, very important. And it was something which, after a few weeks, we were able to achieve in relation to the financial crisis in the European Commission, with direct empowerment of the European Commissioner for, at the time, Nelly Cruz, for competition, and capacity to take decisions within 24 hours. Mostly for the banks, it was over the weekends to avoid market implications. The second thing I'd say, and I come back to the themes which Bill has emphasized, advocacy. Wide advocacy to elected officials, to the financial community, for example, in our case, but as a priority. And this is, again, a simple message. Make sure that the advocacy you do is to other departments of your own authority or government who are in principle in charge of dealing with the crisis. The major concern in 2008, 2009 was financial stability. So all our economic and monetary colleagues were saying, we have to let governments go in and save the economy. This is a systemic crisis. Let's go ahead. Now, if a competition authority is going to be successful in its advocacy, in pointing to the value of a framework for merger control and state aids in the banking sector in a period of crisis, it's that target audience, first of all, you have to take into account. And the second one, as far as the European Union was concerned, was obviously their own partners at the member state level. And we were fortunate in the European Union in having a body which is probably still feared by most of the rest of governments around the world, called the Economic and Finance Committee, which is a forum in which the top advisors to every finance minister, plus a representative of the central bank of the country concerned, plus the ECB, were present. And they, as a body, were extremely skeptical about the need for intervention on competition. They were extremely skeptical as to whether we had any knowledge of the sector. They believed that they were the experts as far as the financial sector were concerned. So if you're a competition authority and you want to intervene, for example, in the financial sector, it's not just a question of legal legitimacy of your action, for example, for us in state aid and control, but our advocacy had to demonstrate to people who regarded themselves as the arch experts in the sector that we knew as much, if not more than them. And we were able to do that. Why? Because we were asking everyone for notification of state aid, so we knew precisely what was happening inside almost all the banks in Europe which were in difficulty. And when we started to, and I represented DG Competition in that committee, they didn't like having a competition official in it. They thought we were irrelevant. But when I started to quote some of the figures in relation anonymously to some of their own banks, they realized that there was a problem. They realized there was a problem of conformity of action of different member states. And we were helped too by examples of what can happen in the short term. The Irish government announced a scheme to protect deposits. The result was that from 24 hours before, where no interest at all in state aid control, every major prime minister had telephoned the president of the commission to say, you've got to do something because there's a run on deposits in Frankfurt to Dublin. There's a run on deposits in Paris. So you can't plan for that, those kinds of events. But if an event occurs which demonstrates what immediate and short-term damage can be done, it's very important to take advantage of it. And I'd say thirdly, vis-a-vis our immediate colleagues, finance ministers, vis-a-vis countries and regulators, persuade them of the advantage of using competition or state aid controls to impose conditions for aid which map out the longer term path towards economic recovery. An economic recovery in the sense of post the financial crisis had two elements: not only restore financial stability, but as an integral part of that, ensure the viability of institutions inside the banking system. And when I mean viability without state aid. Therefore, they were finally convinced that this was absolutely necessary to put a framework on this. They were impatient, however, under a French presidency, by the way, for us to say exactly how we were going to apply the state aid rules to the sector. And I'll come on to that in a minute as to how we went about. I just mentioned the other major points. Flexible use of resources inside your own authority. Re-examination of the enforcement priorities outside the areas where you are legally obliged to follow up. Redeployment within the authority where possible. Then capacity for you to call on a government or your institution to bring additional resources in, which give you more sector expertise. And I come up then to the point on making clear what your policy is. Prepare, consult, and publish guidelines on how you expect to deal with individual cases. Produce regular reports on how individual decisions have been taken and update the guidelines where necessary. Draw lessons of the individual decisions for future legislation. In this case, there was an immediate follow-up to what we were doing because it was necessary to bring forward proposals for bank resolution and deposit protection, which weren't existing before and which prepared the ground for a future crisis. Finally, drawing the map of the new normal can be achieved through judicious application of state aid and competition rules. I haven't mentioned very much merger control, but incorporating the aspects of the implications of mergers for the longer term new normal is an important part of the assessment of a merger. We're talking here about viability, competitiveness of business. We're talking about the protection of consumer interests, and we're talking about effectively functioning markets, which is what competition authorities want us to do.